WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
This is WFYI News Now. It's February 27th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, a few updates from the State House as the legislative session continues, including a bill that would impact regulations on home-based child care, one that aims to help with the nursing shortage, a fight over the definition of toxic PFAS, and we'll look into how much environmental regulations might impact the cost of building a home.
You have a lot of regulations that restrict where people can build. That's going to add to the housing crisis.
Those stories coming up, but first, at the end of last week, the Indiana Department of Health confirmed the first measles case in the state since 2019. Measles is a highly contagious respiratory disease caused by a virus. The department says the risk to the public is low, but also says a single case is considered an outbreak because of how easily it spreads. The IDOH says the disease is rare because of the availability of the measles, mumps, and rubella, or MMR vaccine. Vaccination rates peaked in 2020, but have steadily declined since. The IDOH says people experiencing symptoms should stay home and call their provider before going to the doctor's office. Measles can cause cold-like symptoms like red eyes, tiny white spots inside the mouth, and a rash. The case was confirmed in Lake County. Regulations of home-based child care would be loosened by legislation approved yesterday by the Indiana Senate. The bill increases the number of children allowed in child care homes from 5 to 7, which doesn't include any children in the home who are relatives of the owner. It also allows those homes to care for kids longer, from 4 to 6 hours a day. Republican Senator Greg Walker says parents and families need more child care options, and the bill aims to provide them.
Making sure that home care providers have the ability to keep the costs down, and work with families to provide additional capacity without being regulated out of business.
Democratic Senator J.D. Ford says increasing the number of children who can be in those unlicensed homes goes beyond the levels national experts recommend.
Making child care more accessible at the risk of child safety is something that I absolutely cannot support.
The Senate passed the bill along party lines and now heads back to the House, which can vote to send it to the governor or take it to the conference committee for further work. And Indiana has a nursing shortage, but nursing schools say they don't have enough faculty to educate the amount of students the state needs. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports the Senate passed a bill that simplifies nursing instructor requirements and eliminates a barrier for nurses from other countries to work in Indiana.
Lawmakers say the healthcare workforce is still recovering from the pandemic, and the bill will address barriers within the industry. The bill would eliminate the 18-month clinical experience requirement for instructors, meaning they would only need a nursing license in order to train students. The author of the bill says institutions are best equipped to judge who has the experience to educate nursing students. The measure also allows the Indiana State Nursing Board to issue licenses to registered nurses from other countries by examination, not just endorsement. Nursing associations say the state's current process creates barriers for licensing qualified nurses from other countries. The bill now goes back to the House, which can send it to the governor or take it to a conference committee for further work. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Abigail Ruman.
It's unclear if the bill to change the definition of toxic PFAS in Indiana will move forward. It was stalled in the Senate committee yesterday. Exposure to the chemicals has been linked to kidney cancer, problems with the immune system, and developmental issues in children. Indiana manufacturers want to exempt certain PFAS chemicals from the definition so they can continue to use them to make things like medical devices, drugs, and cars. But the bill's opponents say it would also allow them to make other non-essential products that make people sick. The bill was due for a vote in the Senate Environmental Affairs Committee, but it never happened. The committee chair, Republican Senator Rick Nehmeyer, says right now the bill isn't necessary. Indiana hasn't proposed any rules limiting PFAS in manufacturing.
So at this time, I'm going to not take action, and we're adjourning the meeting for the day. And that's it. Thank you.
Since this is the last week for standing committees to meet, it doesn't look good for the bill. But the legislative session isn't over yet. It's possible the language could get slipped into another bill. The federal government is working quickly to limit the use of some PFAS chemicals after finding out they're much more harmful than it once thought. And for our final story today, groups that represent home builders and developers often talk about how government regulation adds to the cost of building a new home, making home ownership unaffordable for many Hoosiers. But just how much does environmental regulation, like wetland protections, factor into that cost? As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports, whether or not they have a big impact could depend on where you live.
Phil Powell is the executive director of the Indiana Business Research Center at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. He says low supply and high demand is what's making housing so expensive right now. But Powell says all of those government regulations together do add up, especially in cities that have a lot of restrictions like Bloomington.
If you have a lot of regulations that restrict where people can build, that's going to add to the housing crisis. It's not going to be the major driver of higher prices, but it will be an aggravating factor.
Experts say state and local governments can help create affordable housing by allowing for smaller lot sizes, breaking up large homes into duplexes, and requiring some lower-income housing in every new development. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Darian Benson, Drew Dodlin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Aubriana Herron. Our news director is Sarah Neal Estes. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.